How narcissists are bringing down America, crumbling America from within. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Narcissists in America crumbling our Western culture and politics from the inside. Before I get into that, I want to give a quick heads up. If you like Bold and Blunt and would like to subscribe, please go to edify.app/podcasts. That is the online platform for faith-based podcasts, and I'm happy to say that Bold and Blunt is part of Edify's lineup, so check it out there. You can also get Bold and Blunt delivered right to your email box 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, before lunchtime no less, by going to WashingtonTimes.com, scrolling to the bottom under the newsletter section, finding my name, Cheryl Chumley, clicking on it, and subscribing to my 3 times a week newsletter, where you will get delivered right to your email box all my commentaries I write for the Washington Times, as well as my twice weekly Tuesday and Thursday Bold and Blunt podcasts. Narcissists in America. It's a plague. Listen to this. Charles A. O'Reilly is the Frank E. Buck Professor of Management at Stanford Graduate School of Business. And he conducted this research paper that he wrote with Jennifer Chapman of the University of California, Berkeley, where he looked at various documentation of narcissistic leaders across more than 150 areas of studies. And his conclusions were written up in Stanford Business. In an April 30th, 2020 article entitled How Narcissistic Leaders Destroy from Within, the author of this piece, Lee Simmons, wrote, and I quote, "True narcissists," O'Reilly says, "are self-serving and lack integrity." And here's the quote from O'Reilly. "They believe they're superior and thus not subject to the same rules and norms. Studies show they're more likely to act dishonestly to achieve their ends. They know they're lying and it doesn't bother them. They don't feel shame." End of quote from O'Reilly. And now, continuing with this piece written by Simmons, "They are also often reckless in the pursuit of glory, sometimes successfully, but often with dire consequences." Let me read one more paragraph because this is so pertinent to what's going on in today's politics and culture in America. So back to this piece, quoting, "But even worse, narcissists change the companies or countries they lead, much like bad money drives out good, and those changes can outlast their own tenure," O'Reilly says. "Divergent voices are silenced, flattery and servility are rewarded, and cynicism and apathy corrode any sense of shared purpose in a culture where everyone's out for themselves. In the extreme, they can destroy the institution itself." And if America is the institution that we're talking about here, which it is, then America is being rapidly destroyed by people with these very traits. Think Anthony Fauci. Likely to act dishonestly to achieve his ends. Anthony Fauci, who was outed for lying to the American people because he thought it was in the best interest of the American people. Didn't matter that he's not in office to dictate to the American people how the American people should live their lives. Doesn't matter that he's not a bureaucrat paid to tell us all how to live, to regulate our choices, our freedoms. He knows best. And because he didn't think the truth would achieve the ends that he designed in his own mind was best for us, he lied. He skewed the truth. What did he do? Well, go back in time a bit. Slate in July 2021, and Slate by no means is a conservative outlet. Slate wrote, "The Noble Lies of COVID-19." Do we want public health officials to report facts and uncertainties transparently, or do we want them to shape information to influence the public to take specific actions? That's what Slate asked, and this is how Slate opened this piece. In March 2020, as the pandemic began, Anthony Fauci, the chief medical advisor to the President of the United States, explained in a 60 Minutes interview that he felt community use of masks was unnecessary. A few months later, he argued that his statements were not meant to imply that he felt the data to justify the use of cloth masks was insufficient. Rather, he said, had he endorsed mask wearing of any kind, mass panic would ensue and lead to a surgical and N95 mask shortage among healthcare workers who needed the masks more. Yet emails from a Freedom of Information Act request revealed that Fauci privately gave the same advice against mask use, suggesting it was not merely his outward stance to the broader public. This isn't about whether you believe in the power of the face mask or not. It's about a bureaucrat openly lying to the American people because said bureaucrat thinks he knows best what the American people need, and that his lie is justified because in his mind, he is the only one who can be the savior to the American people. Seems pretty classic textbook case narcissism to me, but there's plenty more of that going on. Listen to this. There was this Facebook post put out in the aftermath of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's vacation in Florida. You know Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is the self-described socialist or democratic socialist, same thing, however you want to term it. Democratic socialist, socialist Democrat, progressive, even Democrat in today's party. They're all socialists. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the elected representative in New York, right? Part of her district includes the Bronx, which experienced some months ago a surge in COVID cases. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, is either quietly or openly on board with all the clampdowns on freedoms that the Democrats like to push in order to save us all in America from catching COVID or one of the variants. And so Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez takes off from New York City and heads to Florida, land of the free, land of the Governor Ron DeSantis, who is hated by the left, by Democrats, by the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And yet she goes down there and face mask free, social distancing free, parties, hardies with abandon, and then she gets called out for hypocrisy. And so she has a meltdown, or as this Facebook poster puts on a video that he created in this title, AOC's, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's bizarre meltdown. Listen to this.
From the Daily Wire, it says, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lashed out at critics on Friday after she was caught hanging out in Miami, Florida, as her city deals with a record-breaking number of daily coronavirus cases. National Review reported that, according to photographs obtained by the publication, Ocasio-Cortez was seated outside in Miami Beach, and she was drinking a cocktail. She didn't have a mask on. And she responded to one of her critics calling her out saying, if Republicans are mad they can't date me, they can just say that instead of projecting their sexual frustrations onto my boyfriend's feet. I guess because someone made a comment about the fact that her boyfriend has ugly feet, which it seems like he does. Then she said, you creepy weirdos. And she continued, it's starting to get old ignoring the very obvious, strange, and deranged sexual frustrations that underpin the Republican fixation on me, women, and LGBT plus people in general. These people clearly need therapy. They won't do it, and they use politics as their outlet instead. It's really weird.
Okay, that is got to be the ultimate in narcissist behavior. To be a political leader, to be a public servant, to get outed for hypocrisy, and then to turn around and not just attack your detractors, not just attack those who are criticizing you for your hypocrisy, for your obvious hypocrisy, I should say, but then accuse them of something so weird and strange, of being sexually frustrated and sexually attracted to her. That's just odd. It's the ultimate in narcissistic behavior. And yet, this is happening more and more frequently in our nation because there is a segment of society, the Millennials, who have embraced narcissistic behavior as the norm. Those born between 1980 and 1994 are the most narcissistic, according to a study that consulted both millennials and their grandparents' generation. That's from a February 2017 piece by Jessica Brown, written in Indie100.com, entitled, "Millennials are the most narcissistic generation ever." You know, you can search online and you can find scores of headlines that say similarly, that say millennials are the most narcissistic Americans ever. Their generation is just filled with narcissists. But you can also find headlines that say otherwise, that point to say Generation Z is being worse. The point here is, though, that narcissism can bring down a nation from within. And one problem that I see with the millennial generation, which you can point back to narcissistic tendencies, is their open embrace of socialism at the expense of capitalism. Because when you hate capitalism, when you hate the idea of a free market, what you're basically saying is that you hate the idea of people pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, tapping into the seeds of talent that God has given them at birth, and creating something out of it, and making a profit out of it, and earning for themselves and their families based on that God-given talent. You're rejecting that as a way of living, and instead you're turning to government and relying on government to provide for you and yours from cradle to grave because, and here's where the narcissism creeps into the picture, you believe you're entitled. You think that because you're born and you breathe and you live, that somebody owes you something, that the government's job, because you live and breathe, is therefore to provide for you, that taxpayers in America are there to serve you. And if that's not narcissistic, I don't know what is. Regardless, even if you disagree with that label, you have to agree that it's damaging for America's freedoms. A generation of youth that has grown up with the belief that America has something to apologize for, that America is not exceptional, that America needs to be punished for past sins, that America's freedoms should be clamped for the greater good. A generation that grows up thinking and believing that way is a generation that is going to destroy America from within and very quickly. And my guest today, Mark Bauerlein. He is an English professor at Emory University. He's the editor of First Things, where he hosts a podcast twice a week. He's an author of several books, of 5 books, and his latest is The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, From Stupefied Youth to Dangerous Adults. And he's here today on Bold and Blunt to talk about what he means by that title and what his research has uncovered about the emerging generations of America. Mark, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
I'm glad to be here. You know, I'm in Washington, too, along with you. I'm just down the river.
Oh, I did not know that. Well, maybe we should have gotten together in person for this, but with all the mask mandates, I guess it's safer on the phone, yes?
I mask myself when I drive, and I also mask my car.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Well, you're doubly safe. So let's get right in. Go ahead.
Never be too safe. Never be too safe.
Let's get right into talking about your latest book, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, From Stupefied Youth to Dangerous Adults. What generation are you referring to there?
These are the millennials,
And
those fantastic kids of 2005, 06, 07, who were hailed as the digital natives, the early adopters. They had these tools in hand, and they were running circles around all the grown-ups who were staring, at the handhelds, wondering what they were supposed to do with it. These kids were experimenting and innovating, being creative, and they were predicted to be just this amazing 21st century pioneering generation for our country. They were ambitious. They were going to college in record numbers. They helped elect our first African-American president. They went 2-1 for Obama. The preceding, in 2000, people forget the youth vote almost divided between Bush and Gore. But by 08, they were pretty strong left, and that's only gotten worse as the years have passed. And I wrote this first book, The Dumbest Generation, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future, or Don't Trust Anyone Under 30 in 08. Because while everyone was hailing these kids with these devices in hand and Facebook and all the rest as amazing, I said, this is very bad. It is unhealthy for a 15-year-old to walk around with 250 pictures of himself in his pocket. It's not good to send 4,000 text messages a month, to have this phone, 1 foot from the pillow all night long. So if a picture of that cheerleader comes across at 1 in the morning, you wake up and, you gossip about it. And meanwhile, they're not reading so many books. They're not learning much history. They don't get much religion. No patriotism, certainly. And they're not reading, they're not having great role models. They're all locked in this peer culture. And we're going to see the problems when they get older. And when we look at the millennials now, they're in their 30s, 30-year-olds.
Okay, I was going to ask you to define millennials because I see different ages for them. What year were they born, and how old are they according to your definition?
Well, roughly early 80s to late 90s.
Okay.
Is there? Traditionally generations have been every 20 years, but things have changed. Things change so quickly now that it's shortening. Maybe every 15, 17 years we have a generational identification made. So they're in there. The youngest millennials are maybe 23, 24. The oldest ones are 40.
Okay.
They're now, in those early middle ages for the oldest ones, and they're not young. They're not these amazing, adept, innovative youth figures anymore. You can't be that when you're 33. And they're bitter. They're disappointed. The world hasn't turned out the way they thought it was going to turn out for them. Mark Zuckerberg became a zillionaire, but the rest of them didn't. We got a couple of YouTube stars, millions of downloads, but not all the others. So they have higher rates of depression, anxiety, narcissism. Boy, who would have thought that they would be narcissistic when we handed them a tool that let them do selfies all day and even photograph the food they were going to eat 10 seconds later? Who would have thought they'd become narcissistic? So suicide rates are high. And this is before the pandemic, which has only made everything worse, of course,
right,
for them. On social attitudes, they were talked about as so tolerant and progressive and open-minded and broad-minded. They actually rate as the most intolerant of all the generations out there. They have high levels of social mistrust. They're suspicious of fellow Americans, suspicious of coworkers, and they have a vindictive sense of life. If they see someone doing something wrong, they want that person to pay for it. And this is the basis of that cancel culture that the millennials lead in our country today.
Now, Mark, I've seen some backlash from some in the millennial age that say, well, it was the previous generation that raised us to become how we are, so it's not our fault. How do you respond to that?
One chapter in the first book was called The Betrayal of the Mentors. This book, the recent one, The Dumbest Generation Grows Up, the first line of it is, what have we done to them? Yeah, it's the mentor's fault. All the people who were in any supervisory position over the young, why didn't you say, hey, come on, close that phone. Get off of that stuff. Get away from the screen. Read a book. Learn some history. All right? Get some gratitude for all the things that have preceded you. But we didn't give them that. We didn't give them great music. We didn't give them good movies, these ridiculous superhero movies. We didn't give them role models. I mean, look at the way sports figures, football players, how do they act when they score a touchdown? Can you imagine Bart Starr and Jim Brown behaving the way these guys behave when they score a touchdown with their little stunts? I'm dating myself, I know. But the role models, the heroes that they have, what kind of eloquence do they hear in the public space? I mean, is there anything comparable to the words of the best speeches of FDR or JFK or Booker T. Washington, not to mention, Abraham Lincoln and others? We let them surround themselves with these consumer goods and youth culture and silliness, and we didn't make the adult topics come through, so they're groundless. They're rootless.
Well,
patriotism is a good feeling. It feels good to feel gratitude for your own country. It gives you a foundation of home. We didn't give them that. Weekly religious attendance can help weather the difficulties. We didn't give them that either.
But if we acknowledge that, if we in the previous generations acknowledge the fact that we bear some responsibility for creating this narcissistic millennial generation, doesn't that just embolden the millennial generation to never change, to never take responsibility for their own actions?
Well, I mean, Cheryl, the bitterness shows they're not happy. They don't like the way they live, the way they think. And they're searching for something better. They're searching for purpose and meaning in their lives. They're searching in the wrong places. They're going to Black Lives Matter and racial justice, social justice, climate change. They're Antifa, in more extreme cases. They're going into these visions of the world about, at least on the surface, they can make the world a better place. But these are distorted ambition, distorted organizations. They're the wrong place because we're not giving them the right place. I mean, what I say to people is, what do we do about this? I said, well, you've got to make contact with young people, and you've got to show them better things. You've got to tell them how great it is to have a religion, whatever religion you want to talk about. I'm not going to single things out. Tell them that you're going to feel better if you find greatness in your nation's past more than shame.
Right.
You're going to feel better. It's a better life. You will be a happier person if you read good things that give you great stories of love and honor, betrayal, villainy, heroism. It's going to lift you up instead of, these cheap entertainments that you find. That's what we have to play upon. Their hunger for something better.
You say in the second part of your title, from stupefied youth to dangerous adults, you mentioned a couple minutes ago about the rising suicide rates and so forth in the millennial generation. But in what other aspects do you mean dangerous adults? Dangerous to America's political system? Danger to the education system? How so?
Well, Cheryl, how did they react in November 9th, 2016? Did they say to themselves, I cannot believe that this Donald Trump beat our candidate? And they went for Hillary big, obviously.
Right.
I can't believe this. What did we do wrong? And we're gonna get it back. We're gonna win next time. No. What they did was they had a screaming temper tantrum. They marched. They took over college campuses. They demanded safe spaces in which they could voice their trauma. And that was a sign of their ignorance of politics. I mean, do you think that you get to win every time? Do you think that your guy, Obama, or someone just like him, was going to be in the White House forever? Don't you know that things go up and down? And this is politics. Well, they don't. And they say, well, yes, we should win every time. We're the good ones. We have the right ideas. We're the ones who care. In other words, they failed to respect the democratic process, and they bought into these ridiculous, Russia collusion stuff and P tapes and resist.
Right.
Resist. Well, resist what? Just resist. That's dangerous. That's illiberal. That's anti-democratic. They hate a good portion of their fellow citizens. 63 million people voted for Donald Trump. Are all of them racist, sexist boobs? Yes, they are. This is a dangerous attitude. It's dangerous when they will happily join 2,000 others in a petition or campaign of intimidation to get one person fired for telling a dumb racial joke on social media.
Right.
I'm going to ruin this person for doing an idiotic thing that we all do now and then. No, they're going to pay. We want to make them pay. That's where the dangerousness comes in. They don't try to understand the opposition. I talk about some things that Orson Welles once said about how whatever villains there are out there, everyone has his reasons. That doesn't mean excusing a villain, but you got to try to understand what's going on in other people's heads. Why does someone do something that you think is abhorrent? Why does someone have an opinion that you think is just outrageous? Well, think. No. With them, you're racist. That's sexist. Just this superficial stereotyping of human beings in just these flat, narrow categories that deny any deeper understanding of your fellow Americans.
Yep.
This is the dangerousness.
Yep. No, loss of critical thinking, certainly.
Yeah.
So we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to wrap by, you lay out well just in this few minutes, you lay out well what the problems are with this generation and really some of the sources of the problems. Now look ahead. What's the solution? Where can the millennials go from here?
Cheryl, I actually worry that they're lost.
Right.
They're middle-aged now, and I talk about the importance of, say, reading good books or knowing good stories or watching good movies. They have about 5 hours of leisure time a day. They say we're busy, but they actually have about 5 hours of leisure time. 7 minutes of that leisure time do they spend reading.
Wow.
Are they reading newspapers? I would tell young people, start reading a newspaper, and after 3 months, you're going to be a more interesting human being. You're going to have more to say. You're going to sit down with coworkers who are 20 years older than you are, and you will actually be able to relate to them. You'll bring something to the table. You have a little knowledge. Read a newspaper. It'll benefit you. It'll make you more interesting, as I said. But I don't know. I despair because they're not forming families either. Having children can be a big growing up process. You can't think about yourself when your child is sick at night and coughing. You got to take care of someone. You got to sacrifice yourself a little bit. But they're not getting married and having children. This may be the worst sign of all. 1/3 of millennial men by age 40 will never have been married, which means they probably never will get married. A huge drop. And that means actually a population drop as well for the country. When they retire, there are not going to be enough kids around, young people around to pay for their Social Security. So I don't have a good answer, Cheryl. I don't know. I hope Gen Z bells against them.
That's an honest answer, at least. And look, our time's up, but I do want to get this one other question in really quickly. Is this just pertinent to America, or have you seen similar trends taking place around the world?
We are in front.
Okay.
America is in front on this.
Oh, boy.
As we are in front on, the woke revolution, the identity politics.
Wow.
As well. I think that this is a problem for the West broadly. And if the West doesn't find a way to make the rising generation feel good about the West, about Western civilization, about the history of their own countries, about the legacy of art and music and literature and architecture, if they don't, this is decadence. The Roman Empire went down. I think I think America in 50 years is going to look quite different from the America of today.
I gotta agree with you, Mark. The dumbest generation grows up, from stupefied youth to dangerous adults. It's a very important book for people to get a hold of. Thank you so much, Mark, for writing it and for being on Bold and Blunt.
Thank you.
Lots to think about, lots to consider. Look, here's a quick solution to everything discussed on today's Bold and Blunt. All the problems brought forth, they can be solved if Americans would just turn back to what Founding Fathers warned about. Founding Fathers said that America's freedoms were only intended for a moral and virtuous people. Without God in American society, we crumble from within. All these psychological and mental issues, all these problems, the idea of socialism, can all tail back to the failure of America to keep God in the public, to keep God in the politics, to keep God in the culture. Thank you for listening. If you like Bold and Blunt and want to subscribe, please go to edify.app/podcast, the platform for faith-based podcasts, or find Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com and subscribe there. I appreciate your support. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.